Brand new locomotives barely run, photographed rusting in a scrapyard within 12 months of rolling off the line. How does that even happen? Roughly 40 units representing over $250 million in public contracts were condemned before they'd logged a real year of service. These weren't bargain bin machines. They were marketed as the future of American passenger rail. 4,700 horsepower, 125 miles per hour, 70% cleaner emissions. On paper, the perfect locomotive. So what turned a $250 million fleet into scrap metal? A row of gleaming locomotives, barely a year out of the factory, lines the fence at Lordstown, Ohio. The numbers are staggering, about 40 units, machines designed to anchor a new era of American passenger rail, now stripped for parts, their paint still glossy beneath the dust. Each one cost millions. The total exposure by contract approaches $263 million. That is more than some small towns spend on public works in a decade, all tied up in engines that never saw a second year of service. The scale is not limited to a single operator or model. Metrolink's order alone called for 40 F-125 Tier 4 locomotives, with the initial contract signed in late 2012 and expanded in the years that followed. The promise was unmatched power, clean emissions, and reliability to carry Southern California's commuters for decades. Union Pacific, too, moved brand new units straight from delivery to the scrapyard. As documented in social media posts and rail fan videos, these were not one-off lemons or aging relics. These were the latest, most advanced models available, built to meet the toughest environmental rules on the continent. The financial risk runs deep. Public agencies and private railroads alike committed to these purchases based on projections of multi-decade service life. The contracts, published in board minutes and procurement records, show figures that dwarf the cost of routine maintenance, over $250 million spent. With little to show but rows of silent engines waiting for the torch. Each unit scrapped within its first year represents not just a sunk investment, but an operational gap. Trains that should be moving people or freight, instead replaced by older, dirtier stand-ins or left unfilled altogether. The pattern repeats across yards from California to the Midwest. Freshly painted shells, some with fewer than 1,000 miles on the odometer, are cut up for scrap. Railroads and agencies have little to say on the record, but the evidence is plain in the scrapyard counts and contract ledgers. This is not a story of isolated failure. It is a nationwide puzzle, measured in millions lost and service promises broken. The question is no longer whether a few units failed, but how such a large, costly fleet could collapse so quickly and so completely. Progress Rail rolled out the F-125 with the kind of fanfare reserved for a revolution. Brochures, press releases, and boardroom pitches all told the same story. This was the machine that would change American passenger rail. The numbers alone were enough to get any transit agency's attention. At its heart, a 4,700 horsepower Caterpillar C-175-20 engine, one of the most powerful ever installed in a passenger locomotive on this continent. The F-125 was cleared for 125 miles per hour, promising to cut travel times and muscle through California's busiest commuter corridors. Marketing materials boasted a 70% reduction in particulate and nitrogen oxide emissions compared to the previous generation, meeting the strictest Tier 4 environmental standards. The promise? Clean enough for the future, powerful enough for any schedule, and ready to run for decades. The pitch worked. Metrolink's board approved the first order in December 2012, with contract tables showing a base price of $129.4 million for 20 units, later doubled for a total of 40. The budget swelled to over $263 million as options and infrastructure upgrades stacked up. On paper, it was an investment in reliability and public image, a fleet that would signal Southern California's commitment to cleaner air and modern transit. Progress Rail's branding leaned hard into this vision, touting the F-125 as the first passenger locomotive in the U.S. to achieve full EPA Tier 4 certification. The company promised not just compliance, but a leap forward: more uptime, less maintenance, and a dramatic drop in emissions. The sales team brought out their commissioning engineer to reassure board members that the technology was proven, the support network ready, and the learning curve already conquered. Technical specs in the official documentation read like a wish list: regenerative braking, advanced crashworthiness, a single-cab monocoque frame, and AC traction for smoother acceleration. The auxiliary power unit would keep passenger cars comfortable without idling the main engine, a feature meant to save fuel and reduce noise in city stations. For operators, these were not just bells and whistles. They were selling points tied directly to budgets and regulatory deadlines. The F-125 was designed to meet the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act's next-generation standards, with compliance letters from the California Air Resources Board and the EPA to back every claim. With the order signed and the first units delivered, expectations ran high. These locomotives were supposed to anchor a new era, setting the standard for what American passenger rail could be. The money, the technology, and the political capital all said the same thing: this was the game changer. But as the months ticked by, the gap between promise and reality began to widen. The first warning sign arrived not in a boardroom, but on a platform crowded with reporters and transit officials. On the day of the F-125's public unveiling in Los Angeles, the locomotive rolled into view under its own power, then almost immediately ground to a halt. Cameras kept rolling as technicians clustered around the engine compartment, faces tense. The maintenance engineer, clipboard in hand, stepped forward to read out fault codes. The logbook recorded the moment. Emissions filter clogged. Engine shut down. Fault code PBP-1. The promise of clean, unstoppable power was interrupted by a blinking warning light and a forced reset in front of the entire audience. Forum posts lit up within hours, with rail fans and insiders trading rumors about what had gone wrong. Some pointed to the emission system, others to the engine's control software. But the official log told a simple story. The emissions filter, designed to trap pollutants and satisfy the strictest Tier 4 standards, had choked during its first real-world demonstration. The locomotive's control unit, reading a spike in back pressure, triggered a protective shutdown. The event wasn't a fluke. Within days, similar entries appeared in maintenance records for other units: clogged filters, aborted regeneration cycles, unexplained engine faults. The maintenance engineer's log became a running diary of disappointment. Each new delivery brought hope that the bugs were fixed, but the same codes kept appearing. The F-125's debut was supposed to inspire confidence in a new era of American passenger rail. Instead, it left a paper trail of early failures and a growing sense of doubt among those tasked with keeping the fleet on the rails. The gap between brochure promises and operational reality, once a footnote, now stared back from the very first page of the logbook. A locomotive's after-treatment system is a marvel of modern engineering, on paper. In the F-125, the heart of this system is a diesel particulate filter and selective catalytic reduction unit, both controlled by a network of sensors and software. The theory is simple. Sensors track exhaust pressure and temperature. The software decides when to burn off trapped soot, and emissions stay clean enough to pass the strictest EPA Tier 4 standards. But in practice, the system became a minefield. An independent systems engineer, brought in after the first wave of failures, sat down with the maintenance logs. One entry stands out: pressure sensor drift, logged as PBP-01, occurring on nearly every unit within months. The sensor, mounted in a high vibration zone near the filter flange, began to report values 5 to 10% above baseline after just a few hundred hours. This small error was enough to throw off the entire regeneration cycle. When the sensor drifted high, the control unit interpreted the data as a sign that the filter was already under stress. Instead of triggering a regeneration, the high-temperature burn needed to clean out soot. The system suppressed it. Soot mass in the filter soared past safe limits. The next time a regeneration did occur, the temperature spiked, sometimes breaching the 650 degrees Celsius design ceiling. Engineers found evidence of cracked ceramic substrates and sintered catalyst material in failed units, signs of repeated thermal overstress. Maintenance crews tried to reset the system, but each attempt was met with new fault codes. The control software, lacking a fallback check, kept the locomotive in a protective derate mode, cutting power and sidelining the engine. Each derate meant another train delayed, another gap in service, and another entry in the growing list of warranty claims. The data showed a clear pattern. A single sensor's drift, left unchecked by software, triggered a cascade of failures that no amount of routine maintenance could prevent. As one engineer put it, the F-125's after-treatment system was a house of cards built on a single sensor. The technical collapse wasn't just a matter of bad parts or bad luck. It was the result of a design that left no room for error in a regulatory environment where error meant immediate, public consequences. EPA Tier 4 rules, enforced starting in 2015, changed the landscape for locomotive operators. The regulations did not just set a target for cleaner air. They demanded that every new locomotive prove its emissions performance not once but continuously in real-world service. For the F-125, that meant more than passing a laboratory test. It required ongoing compliance monitoring, with in-use testing that could trigger penalties if a single unit failed to meet strict nitrogen oxide and particulate limits. A regulator from the California Air Resources Board described the process. Each locomotive must carry data loggers, and the agency can request emission samples at any time. If a unit's after-treatment system falls out of spec even briefly, the operator faces mandatory reporting and, in some cases, immediate withdrawal from service. The penalty framework is unforgiving. A single failed in-use test can lead to fines, forced retrofits, or even decertification of the entire fleet. For Metrolink and other agencies, the technical flaws in the F-125's emission system quickly became a legal trap. Sensor drift, or a missed regeneration cycle, did not just mean a maintenance headache, it meant the locomotive was suddenly and officially non-compliant. The risk calculation changed overnight. Instead of just fixing a broken part, operators now faced the possibility of regulatory action, loss of operating authority, and mounting fines. By 2021, the pressure was acute. The EPA's compliance test requirements left no room for error. A locomotive with a persistent emissions fault could not be quietly sidelined or run in limited service. It had to be fixed immediately or removed from the roster. For a fleet already hampered by design flaws, the regulatory squeeze turned every fault code into a potential crisis. The legal and financial consequences loomed as large as the engineering problems themselves. The numbers behind the scrapyard decision reveal a cold arithmetic. When a brand new locomotive fails, the question is not whether it can be fixed, but whether it should. An economist reviewing internal repair estimates and salvage receipts lays out the calculation. A typical modern locomotive weighing in at around 120 tons brings in only $36,000 to $60,000 when sold for scrap, based on steel prices hovering near $300 to $500 per ton. That figure can rise slightly if traction motors or copper wiring are pulled for resale, but the bulk of the value remains in the metal. Repair, on the other hand, is a different story. For the F-125, the cost to replace a failed after-treatment system or a critical inverter climbs quickly past $200,000. Even a single major component, prime mover, traction motor, or emissions package, can push the bill above the scrap value 5 times over. And that's before factoring in labor, diagnostic work, and the cost of keeping the unit out of service for months while parts are sourced. Parts availability becomes a wall. Lead time reports from suppliers show that certain emission system modules or proprietary electronic controls have wait times stretching into months if they can be sourced at all. In some cases, the original vendor has shuttered production entirely, leaving operators with no legal or technical path to repair. The scrapyard operator at Lordstown describes a steady flow of units arriving with fault tags still taped to their cabs, engines barely run in, but with parts lists marked NLA, no longer available. The operator says they don't see this with older engines. Those you can fix forever. These new ones, once the parts dry up, that's it. For a railroad manager, the decision point is stark. A locomotive that costs $3 million new but needs $200,000 in repairs and months of downtime can be replaced by a functioning older unit or simply written off for its scrap value. The math is unforgiving. Every month a failed locomotive sits idle. It racks up storage costs and exposes the operator to service penalties or regulatory fines. In this environment, scrapping a nearly new engine is not an act of desperation, but a rational response to a dead end in the supply chain. The financial threshold is crossed long before the last bolt is removed in the yard. Success and failure in locomotive fleets often come down to more than horsepower or emissions numbers. An independent engineer, reviewing fleet data across the industry, points to the Siemens Charger as a model of what works. Since its 2016 debut, the Charger has racked up 200,000 miles between failures, double the industry average for passenger units. Availability rates consistently top 95%, and operators like Amtrak and state departments of transportation praise the streamlined Easy Spares program. When a part fails, Siemens guarantees delivery within 48 hours, keeping downtime to a minimum. The company's long-term support contracts and 30-year performance guarantees tie together technical reliability and a robust supply chain, ensuring that even as regulations tighten, the fleet stays compliant and on the rails. The contrast with the GE AC6000CW is stark. Launched in the late 1990s as a freight powerhouse, the AC6000CW promised 6,000 horsepower and a leap ahead in efficiency. But field reports soon revealed a different story. The 7HDL engine suffered from vibration-induced failures, cracked turbochargers, broken fuel lines, and premature bearing wear. Maintenance overruns became routine, with some operators facing millions in corrective costs per procurement cycle. Spare parts could take weeks or months to arrive, and warranty disputes dragged on for years. Availability often fell below 85%, and many units were sidelined or scrapped before reaching midlife. The AC6000CW's experience became a cautionary tale. Raw engineering ambition without a proven support network can leave even the most powerful machines stranded. Regulation adds another layer. The Environmental Protection Agency's Tier 4 rule, effective from 2015, forced every new locomotive to cut nitrogen oxide and particulate emissions by more than 70% compared to earlier models. For the Charger, this was baked into the design, with certification and in-use compliance verified before the first unit entered service. For fleets like the F-125, the regulatory bar moved mid-project. A locomotive that passed the lab test could still be tripped up by real-world emissions failures or parts shortages. When a key after-treatment module failed, operators faced not just repair bills, but the risk of fines. forced withdrawals, or even decertification. The engineer sums it up. Success isn't just about meeting the spec on paper. It's about building an ecosystem, parts, support, compliance, and a plan for what happens when something goes wrong. Without that, even the most advanced locomotive can end up as nothing more than a line item in the scrapyard ledger. Even today, railroads order fleets worth hundreds of millions. Yet, a locomotive's fate still hinges on more than engineering. As emissions rules tighten and supply chains shift, the gap between what's promised and what's possible grows wider. In heavy industry, survival isn't about innovation alone. It's about the ecosystem that keeps a machine alive or lets it die forgotten. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.